On April 14, 1912, Titanic was moving toward an iceberg at about 22 knots. Wireless ice reports existed, but they had not reached the same decision makers. More than 2,200 people were aboard. Some reports reached Captain Edward Smith, others stopped in the wireless room. Why did those warnings not slow the ship before the collision became unavoidable? At 9 that morning, Smith had personally received and acknowledged an ice report from Caronia. About 1,500 passengers and crew would die. Total ignorance cannot explain what followed. The case turns on speed, lookout, message delivery, and the belief that a known danger could still be managed. To answer the question, we need to trace what reached the people navigating the ship when it reached them, and how that information was interpreted. The first message in the formal British investigation came from Caronia. At about 9 in the morning, it reported bergs, smaller pieces of ice, and field ice. Smith received the message and acknowledged it. That fact immediately rules out the simplest version of the story. Titanic's captain was not completely unaware of ice on the route. At 1:42 in the afternoon, Baltic reported icebergs and large quantities of field ice. Smith received this message too. He handed it to J. Bruce Izeme, a senior White Star Line official traveling aboard the ship, then recovered it later. It was posted in the chart room at about 7:15 that evening. The investigation called the handling irregular, but did not conclude that this delay changed Titanic's navigation. Only minutes after the Baltic report, another message passed through Titanic. Amerika was sending a private report for the United States Hydrographic Office. Titanic's wireless room received it, but the British investigation concluded that it was not delivered to an officer. The information existed aboard the ship without becoming bridge information. This is the first important distinction. Receiving a radio signal was not the same as placing its position and meaning in front of a navigating officer. The complete list we can reconstruct afterward was never a single document held by one person that evening. At about 7:30, Titanic intercepted a message from Californian to another ship, Antillean. It reported 3 large icebergs. Wireless operator Harold Bride later said this report was delivered to the bridge, although he could not remember which officer received it. The delivery is evidence. The identity of the recipient remains uncertain. Then, at about 9:40, Mesaba sent a more concentrated description. Heavy pack ice and many large icebergs in Titanic's immediate vicinity. It reached the wireless room, but the formal investigation concluded that it was not delivered to the captain or the deck officers. Around 11, Californian contacted Titanic again. This time its operator reported that Californian had stopped and was surrounded by ice. Titanic's operator replied while working traffic with the shore station at Cape Race. The surviving record does not show this final contact reaching the bridge, so it cannot honestly be presented as a direct order that the officers saw and rejected. By now the pattern is clear. Caronia reached Smith, Baltic reached Smith and later the chart room. Amerika stopped in the wireless room. The intercepted Californian report was said to have reached the bridge, but the recipient was unknown. Mesaba stopped in the wireless room. The last Californian exchange remained between operators in the surviving account. These messages differed in route, timing, wording, and operational weight. Counting them cannot explain the disaster. A list treats every warning as equal. The people aboard did not experience them that way. On a finished timeline, the reports sit neatly beside one another. On the ship, they were separated by hours, duties, and recipients. A message that remained in the wireless room could not influence the bridge. A report delivered to an unidentified officer leaves a real limit on what can be reconstructed. Once every surviving item is assembled, the sequence looks like a steadily rising alarm. In real time, it was a set of uneven fragments. Hindsight gives the archive a clarity that Titanic's decision chain did not provide. The officers were not navigating as if ice were impossible. The British report says Smith and several deck officers knew that Titanic was entering a region where ice might be expected. Yet the ship did not reduce speed before avoiding the collision was no longer possible. To understand that choice, the investigation looked beyond Titanic. On North Atlantic liners, an established practice in clear weather was to maintain course and speed while relying on a sharp lookout to detect ice in time. Previous experience had made that practice appear workable. Smith was following a habit shared by other experienced captains, not attempting to set a speed record. The inquiry rejected the record attempt story, but it did not excuse the speed. It estimated Titanic was traveling at about 22 knots and judged that speed excessive under the circumstances. The central contradiction is therefore sharper than simple ignorance. The bridge knew ice was possible, yet accepted practice treated the hazard as something lookouts could manage without slowing the ship. Incomplete message delivery made that judgment harder to challenge. The bridge did not receive the full sequence in the neat order available to investigators. Still, missing messages cannot carry all the blame. Enough information had arrived for the officers to expect ice. What failed was the conversion of that knowledge into a safer operating decision. It is tempting to choose one lost message, especially Mesaba, and say that delivering it would certainly have saved the ship. The evidence cannot prove that counterfactual. A delivered warning still had to be read, plotted, interpreted, and turned into action. We can identify a broken information path without pretending to know exactly how every alternative decision would have unfolded. The opposite claim is also wrong. Titanic was not simply surprised by a danger no one had mentioned. Multiple reports existed, and key officers knew they were approaching an ice region. The disaster emerged from several conditions meeting at once: incomplete routing, uneven urgency, confidence in visual detection, and an operating practice that preserved speed in a known hazard zone. That is why the ice warnings did not stop Titanic. They were never one command moving through one reliable chain. Some were delivered, some were delayed, and some remained with the radio operators. Above them all sat a larger assumption. Knowing ice might be ahead did not yet mean the ship had to slow down. The lesson is not that warnings are useless. It is that information has to reach the right decision maker, with enough context and urgency to change what the system is already prepared to do. If you prefer evidence over legend, the next case is already waiting in the archive.